The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Summer music festivals are back. So to celebrate, all this July, the Agenda in the Summer revisits conversations with a diverse cast of musicians and music experts. Tonight, Martha Wainwright. Growing up is hard enough without feeling as though you're in the shadow of not only your brother, but your mother and father too. To call Martha Wainwright the daughter of a legendary musical family is a mere starting point. The highly acclaimed singer-songwriter has always had her own story to tell in music and in life. She's now laid that bare in an incredibly frank and captivating memoir titled Stories I Might Regret Telling You. And it's a pleasure to welcome Martha Wainwright to our virtual studio from Montreal, Quebec. Hello.
Hi.
It's very nice to meet you. You admit in the book that writing the book was a thorn in your side for about 7 years, and that if your mother was alive, you might not have written it. What made you decide to follow through in writing your memoir?
Well, I didn't want to have to give back the advance for was the main reason, but also because I worked hard on it. I was very, I felt very like, it spoke to my ego and to my vanity when I was asked to do it. And I thought, okay, well, I'll write a book. But then a year went by and I thought, okay, I better get started on this book that I said I was going to write. And then I got into it and it would prove to be quite difficult, because it's, I had never done anything like this before. And, it was really intense, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of it was a lot of process. And I wrote a lot, and then I took a lot out, and then I changed it, and then a couple of years went by where I didn't touch it at all because I thought I don't want to do this. It's too much. And then I went back to it and thought, no, I do want to do this, and I want to try and figure out what I want to say and what I think is important, and get rid of some of the stuff that I don't think is that important, and have it be funny, but also have it be, tell my story, there was some sad stuff in there too. So it was hard, but I'm really glad it's over. And I don't regret it at all, but I'm glad it happened.
Well, I was going to ask if you do regret it, but because the title says Stories I Might Regret Telling You, and it's good to hear that you don't regret it. But your ex-husband used an earlier draft against you in your divorce, and you also write about other people who are still alive. Was it difficult to decide to share as much as you did, even when you were telling other people's stories, like your dad, for example?
Well, the stories of my family and that relate to my dad, there's stories that have already been exposed a little bit in articles and even in songs that we've written, and also in my dad's own book, Liner Notes, it's called, where he talks about my mom and also Ceci Roach, who he was married to, and sort of the ins and out a little bit of their divorce and their being together in their marriage. And so it wasn't anything that was a shocker, I don't think, to anybody who knew our family story a little bit. And also I think that it's although it's not an everyday family, our family, we are touched by the same things that most families are touched by, and some of those things are taboo, and some of those are difficult, and separation and divorce and remarriage and dynamics in family and jealousy and so I think that people probably recognize pretty quickly some of these themes and have experienced them themselves.
You did say that a lot of these stories, especially with your dad, were known, but I think on the first page, you kind of punch the reader in the gut because you write this story that your father actually wished that your mother had an abortion, and that's a very personal and hurtful thing to share. So why share that?
Well, I mean, I started it, at the beginning of my life, and I was told that story, and that when I found that out, I was very upset. And that sort of set me on, I think, a course through the book that you see of someone who is really lacks security and lacks feeling of confidence. And knowing that about my beginning didn't help. And then I pretty quickly go on to talk about my own marriage, and that I myself, terminated a pregnancy while I was married after having children. And I think the idea, and I hopefully this comes across, is not so much that I blamed my parents or my father for making that kind of those making decisions like that, and considering having an abortion. I think that that's something that a lot of people have to do. It was more sort of whether or not I should have been told that when I was a teenager. That was maybe too much information to give to a young person. And so, yeah, my father definitely ends up being, a kind of a target in the book, on the first page in particular. But I think that hopefully the book sort of shows very much in a love and appreciation and a respect for him, and that's not the takeaway. I hope not.
No, it's definitely, you saw the progression in your relationship. And I think when we're young, we kind of see our parents as if they belong to us. And then
Yeah.
as we get older, we start seeing them as individuals, people who had their own dreams and wishes and problems. Do you think that you grew to understand him better as you got older and when you became a parent?
When I became a parent, yes, but I think even more when I became a songwriter, and I had written songs about his family uh, members, and then I started doing the same thing, and I started repeating the same, perhaps bad habits that my parents had.
We have a picture of your dad with his grandson, your dad,
Yeah.
Loudon.
Yeah, and my dad, Loudon Wainwright III, and he's holding my youngest son, Francis Valentine. And so I connected with my dad through music, and also we have the same life in many ways, traveling from city to city, singing our songs, being troubadours, and that's really where we understand each other the best. And as a parent, I'm a different type of parent. I'm much more like my mom was, but I don't really, I was really considering him more as an artist in this book. Um, but also as a father, of course, but really, really more our connection as artists.
Well, it's one thing to say you are the child of famous singers, but in your case, you were right up there with them from a very young age. We have a picture here. Here you are at the Newport Folk Festival. How did you come to be a part of the act?
We started off as, young people singing. When we were young in the summertime, we would go on tour with our mom and aunt, and sometimes with my dad. And we didn't have babysitters, so what they had to do something with us, so we had to get up on stage and sing.
That's pretty
That was
great.
the solution.
It sounds like a great childhood. But just to illustrate how this truly was the family business, here you are with the extended McGarrigle and Wainwright clans at one of your annual Christmas shows. Is there anyone in your family who can't sing? Do you have any accountants, bakers?
We got a couple who can't sing, but we make sure that they stay afar from the microphone. We don't want to tell them. They don't know. So we just sort of pretend that they can.
Were you always resolute in becoming a musician?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that it was very natural. I always liked the stage as a young person, like many young people do, who like to be, in theater and singing songs and in their bathroom in the bath or stuff. But I was a good enough student. I was kind of a little bit lazy, but I was a good enough student. But I did realize I had one math teacher who told me when I was in grade 9, she was mad at me because my homework wasn't done properly, and she said, "What do you want to do all your life? Sing and dance?" And I thought, yeah, that
That sounds good.
that sounds about right, probably.
I wanted to read an excerpt from your book, and this is about your mom, Kate. You write,
Okay.
Kate was often frustrated with me to the point of being hurtful. She broke some cardinal parenting rules, like talking shit about my dad, but then she would raise him up to an almost godlike position, saying how great a singer he was and that he was underappreciated. She couldn't always control her temper, but I couldn't control mine either. They were scenes. She occasionally told me I was mediocre. Hearing your mom call you mediocre, what effect did that have on you?
Well, once again, I think it was something that she shouldn't have said, and it was very painful. But I think I go on to say that, I don't really think that she might have meant it, but I think that she wanted me to be as good as I could be, and I had always had trouble sort of taking the reins and taking control of the talent that I might have and sort of going as far as I could with it. And I think she had seen me over the years sort of repeatedly shoot myself in the foot a little bit and make mistakes and sort of do not a great performance when there was important people in the audience and not do a great performance when there was no one in the audience, or be self-destructive and sort of not take my work seriously. And I think that she was, and it wasn't, I'm not trying to make excuses for her, because no one should ever call anybody mediocre, especially not a young person and their kid. But I think that I like to think that she believed in me and she wanted to see me live up to my potential.
How, when you do hear that, it kind of, like reading your memoir, it seemed to kind of sow a seed of like doubt in you. How long did it take for you to silence that doubt?
About 25 years after starting. I mean, I think this is the newer me, I guess, has really let that go, but it's taken me a long time. Everyone has their different way of getting there. And for me, it required doing shows for 25 years and, making many albums and finally feeling, okay, well, I'm just as good, as my parents and my brother. And it's not, it was my kind of slower paced attempt to be at the table and just to feel good about it.
You write about your brother Rufus. Lots of funny stories about the sibling rivalry you both had. I think when you came from the hospital, the story was that he poured a glass of grape juice over your head.
Yes, that's correct.
And then there's a story of how you tripped him.
Right, exactly. And almost killed him.
No,
yeah,
but,
we were,
but now you admire each other and you love each other very much. I wanted to read an excerpt from the book that you write. Though I was a daughter of twice over, doors seemed closed to me in stark contrast to the attention paid to the sons of musical stars. I knew and hung out with all those boys in New York and LA, Teddy Thompson, Sean Lennon, Chris Stills, Harper Simon, and the list goes on and on. I liked them. They were my friends, but they were all getting signed and written about and had publicists and photo shoots and beautiful girlfriends. Were their songs better than mine? Were their songs more genuine? I think Bloody Mother effing a-hole is really about getting the short end of the stick. And I made a little edit because I can't say those words on TV. What has it been like for you as a woman in the music industry?
Well, especially at the beginning, it felt, like there
There
were
you are
more
performing.
barriers. Yeah, there I am singing.
Hmm.
Especially at the beginning, it certainly felt that there were more barriers, and I imagine that is also because of the way that I felt about myself, and didn't think I was good enough or pretty enough or talented enough or good enough at my instrument, and so there was a lot of insecurity that played into that. But I would say that it was kind of odd to me that at the time, there was all of these guys getting so much attention, and we weren't hearing so much from the daughters of these rock stars, and we haven't as much at all. There are some breakaways from that, but I guess, as yeah, as women, as young women, in particular, we were sort of taught to still, um, you know, get married or get a job and sort of, get on with your life, and not to become kind of a stage person or rock and roller or a musician was still and is still to this day, not it's a different path than a lot of women take, and I think it's because there's not as many examples. And I think also in history of women in rock and women in music, there's always a sort of darkness associated with it. You can't be a good mother and also be playing at nighttime in music venues and surrounded by unsavory people or something. Or certainly there are unfortunately, in the past in music, a lot of women who were singers. Some of them had difficult times being a parent and being accepted, and so I think that there's an image that we have of that, of sort of the wild, crazy woman who's drinks too much and is just sort of destined to die in obscurity, somewhere. And it's really unfortunate, and I think it does set up this um, feeling that it's not possible or not good or not viable, which is too bad. And I would imagine that, I'm going to venture to guess that I probably get paid less than men who have my job and who sell as many records as I do, which is not that many, but just I think that that's really unfortunately still the case.
I'm sure you're 100% right. In the
Yeah.
book, you mentioned that singers like Nina Simone and Judy Garland were looked upon differently because they wanted to pursue their careers. And I wanted to bring your mom back into this. You detail the years of hard work, but also the trade-offs that your mom, Kate McGarrigle, she was in a duo with your aunt, Anna, and some of the trade-offs that they had to make. They both put their careers on pause to raise their kids. We've got a picture of them there with all y'all. How did that affect their careers, having to kind of choose between the domestic life and wanting to be successful in the music industry?
Well, they wanted to, for the most part, stay home with their kids and be present with at home. And I understand that instinct very much. That I would love to be able to do that, but I have to go out and work and make a living. And Kate and Anna were lucky enough to have written a handful of really great songs that other women sang, and that really put us through college, as my mom used to say. Linda Ronstadt sang Heart Like a Wheel, and Emmylou Harris sang some of their songs. They were on some Nana Muscuri. So that really afforded them the ability to stay home more. That being said, I think that, especially for my mother, she really wished that she could have taken her or their career further and gone into the upper echelons of female songwriters, and if we think of Joni Mitchell, which we weren't allowed to listen to as kids because my mother was so jealous in many ways, that kind of commitment to music, was not conducive to her being at home with her kids. And so she did make a decision, and I understand the decision that she made. And I myself now am sort of trying to balance the two. And everyone talks about balancing. You want balance in your life. I don't know if there's ever any balance for real. It's just sort of walking a tightrope and just teetering and hoping that you don't fall.
And I think we do live in a society that's it says to women that you can do everything, but
Uh,
you have to do all these things, be, attractive for your partner, be great at your job, be a great parent. There's no room for failure.
there's no room for failure. And also, once you're doing your job, being, a doctor or a lawyer or a journalist or whatever, and then being a great mom, and then you're expected to look good doing it, then it also clean up, and then you feel bad if you don't pass a vacuum or what. It's just like, it's a little bit much. And I sound like I'm complaining about my life and how hard it is, because my life is very um, I'm blessed, and I have a lot of privilege, and I have a lot of help, and with managers, and people help me out a lot. But so I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about my situation at all, but I just do. And in a way, it makes sense. There's so little time on this planet. You do want to do it all. You know what I mean? And but I feel finally, I'll be 46 next month. I feel a little calmer. The kids are happy in school, which is like the most important thing. Like, just keep things rolling, keep things going. I'm just excited about going to the beach. That's all I want to do at this point. Will we get to go to the beach? That's the priority number. How many books have I sold? I don't know. Will I get to go to the beach?
I'm right there with you. But I don't think you were complaining. I think we don't. I think a lot of women don't feel like they have the permission to talk about this stuff, right? And
Right.
you in the book, you write about your relationship with your mother, and I wonder too if her and her sister were able to, felt as if they could talk about those things. There's a picture of you and your mom. Your mom died when she was 63, and she died shortly after you had your first child. How did her death affect you? You lost your mother while you became a mother.
Well, I was always I was a kind of a hot mess when I was in my 20s, just very wild and lots of, I mean, not, it's not that terrible, but I was just like kind of partying and having fun and making records, but kind of, like, I was dedicated to it, but I was just kind of like flailing a little bit in a way. And then I had to be like a adult. I had a young child who was born premature and had some real issues. And then, my mom died, and then I owned a house, and then owned this other house, and then I had to pay all this mortgage, and I was like alone in many ways and really sad, and I really had to sort of pull it together. And in that way, it changed my life. And I think, in many ways, it forced me to grow up, which I think was good. And I could feel her helping me along the way, when I would say, okay, what would Kate do? Or what would Kate want me to be doing right now? Or how can I do the best that I can for her? Her life has been cut so short, and I just wanted her to be proud of me, and to make it, enjoy and have use the time that I have on this planet to do good things, and to make good music, and to be a good mom, and all of that stuff. So in that way, it kind of really changed my outlook, and I think it made me a little less selfish and navel gazing, and it just kind of sort of shocked me into sort of responsibility more, which needed to happen. And it also made me take on more of her personality traits. And I think that I've been lucky to do that, because she was such an incredible person. So I really wanted to absorb some of her brilliance, and I was open to that.
Your career really took off after what I will call BMFA.
Yeah.
A lot of people assume that this song was about your dad. But in the book, you say that it wasn't necessarily about your dad. So, two-pronged question. When your career took off, was it the career you wanted? Or did you have other things that you wanted to achieve? And who is the song directed to?
Well, I think I'm happy now in my career. God knows I feel like I'm doing enough, and I'm working hard, and I can't do much better with what I have. I'm just trying my best, and that's good enough finally for me, and I'm not so worried about it. And the song is about not being taken seriously, as I think I wrote in the book, but also the song very quickly from the first moment that I sang it in public, people started to listen to it and close their eyes and sing along. I would look out into the audience as they sang along to the words, and I realized that this song has absolutely nothing to do with me and my dad. It has only to do with what these people in the audience needed to be about in their lives in that moment. And so it became more of an anthem, I think, and for them, for whoever's listening to it, kind of a useful song.
Well, in our final moments together, I just want to play another clip, and this is the music video from the title song of your latest album, which came out last summer, called Love Will Be Reborn. Let's take a listen.
Walls are falling down everywhere, and love will be reborn. And love will be reborn.
I'm going to guess that those were your sons?
Yes.
Yes. So if your sons came to you in, I don't know, 15 years, 10 years and said, this is what I want to do, I want to go into music, you would say what?
I would say good luck. No, I would say absolutely, and I will help them to do that as much as they want me to do, but also to take their time and to I think most importantly, enjoy the music part of it, and that's the most important part of it. How does the music make you feel? How does playing your instrument make you feel? How does singing make you feel? And that, that is the thing that's the most important part of it.
And so, Martha, I'm going to say something that might sound a little petty, but it's a little unfair as to how gifted you are. This is one of the best books that I've ever read. It is funny, it is engaging, it's so honest. So it just seems a little unfair that not only are you a great singer-songwriter and beautiful, but like your writing, I think a lot of people are going to appreciate your candid memoir, and I appreciate you writing it. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really, really kind. Thank you.
And that is tonight's Agenda in the Summer. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. And we'll see you again next time.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.